Hey guys, today we are talking about the Mexican-American War, the causes and the consequences of this war. So let's just hop right into it. So for the causes, President Polk, remember he ran to become president all in a campaign about adding land to the United States, and he has his eyes set on Mexican land. We know that in 1845 he annexed Texas, which was independent from Mexico at that point. However, when Texas was added to the United States, the actual US Mexico border was kind of disputed. Both countries thought that the border between the US and Mexico was different. So let's look at this map over here for a second. The US believed that the correct US Mexico border was the Rio Grande River, right here. Okay? Mexico believed that the correct US Mexico border was the Nueces River, right here. So this land that is highlighted or shaded in red is disputed. Both countries think they own it. Now, we know from this course before that if there is disputed land, there's probably going to be war over it. And so Polk actually wants a war to happen because he's thinking if the US can beat Mexico, then maybe they can add a whole bunch of Mexican land. So what he does to cause this war is he purposefully sends US troops into this shaded area, knowing that Mexico will see this as an invasion and will attack those troops, which is exactly what happens. Mexico believes they own this land, and so they see the American troops here as an invasion. They fire shots, and 11 US soldiers are killed. Polk goes to Congress and he says, listen, American blood has been shed on American soil. We got to declare war on Mexico. Congress decided to declare war. However, there were some people in Congress, like Abraham Lincoln of the Whig Party, who believed that the war was really just caused by Polk, and Polk wants to expand slavery to any land that is added. So, yes, we are going to have this war, but it's important to know that some people, especially people from the North, anti-slavery people, they are against this war from the start. So we're not going to go into all of the details of the war. It's from 1846 to 1848. There's a series of battles, but essentially, in the end, the U.S. defeated Mexico. The land that Mexico was trying to defend was just so large that they just didn't have the resources to actually defend it against the American troops. So to end the war, the U.S. and Mexico signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. What this treaty does is Mexico gives up a very large portion of land, it's here in red, called the Mexican Cession. So it includes California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, and then parts of Colorado and New Mexico. All of that is added to the United States. Plus, Mexico gives up any of its land claims right here in what was considered back then Texas. The US did pay a little bit of money for this, but essentially it was like pennies on the acre for this land. And Mexico definitely felt like this land had been stolen from them. In this cartoon down here, one of the Mexican mascots is the Mexican eagle. So here it says the Mexican eagle before the war. You can see that it has lots of feathers. It's standing on a really healthy cactus. But then on the other side, it says the Mexican eagle after the war, and you can see that the feathers have been plucked, representing the land that was taken, and the cactus is kind of dead and wilted. So they definitely feel like they got the short end of the stick in this war. But to form the modern US-Mexico border, there is another little piece of land that is added, not through war, but just through a purchase. Called the Gadsden Purchase. In 1853, the U.S. bought this little piece of land right here, kind of in this mustard yellow, I guess, because they wanted to send a railroad through it. Apparently that land was really flat, and so America bought it so they could send a railroad through the Gadsden Purchase. And this is going to finalize the current U.S.-Mexico border that exists today. Okay, so a whole bunch of land has just been added to the United States. Americans want to move there, right? Manifest destiny. But every time that a new piece of land is added, this debate on slavery comes back up. Should we have it in new land? Should we not? The Democrats, which we'll follow this a little bit over the next few objectives, they're starting to split over slavery. The Northern Democrats want one thing, the Southern Democrats want another thing. Polk is having a hard time keeping unity within the party, and so he does not run for re-election. We also know that the gag order on slavery was lifted, Texas is added as a slave state, and now there's a debate on, okay, what are we going to do up here in this Mexican cession land? Are we going to have that be free or slave? There was a bill that was proposed called the Wilmot Proviso, which suggested banning slavery in this area, but it was quickly shot down in Congress because the South was never going to allow that to happen. So the Wilmot Proviso, even though it failed as a law and never takes actual effect, it just kind of represents the debates over slavery. And that banning slavery outright in this area was not going to be possible. Okay, at the same time that the Mexican-American War is ending, gold is found in California. So this leads to the gold rush, California gold rush. It's in 1848 and 1849. Thousands, I mean, probably like millions of people rush to California to try to look for gold. They're not just Americans, you've got Mexicans, you've got Asians, you've got, British Canadians. They're not just men either. There's women also. There's also, it's not just white people, like it's people of all ethnicities and backgrounds, basically trying to find gold to kind of restart their lives over. And so as all of these people are moving to California, California has some pretty big consequences. Like San Francisco becomes super populated very quickly, and it becomes the largest port on the West Coast. And California's population grew and became super diverse because of the California gold rush. However, there's lots of tensions between these people. We'll talk more about that later on this semester. There's discrimination against Chinese immigrants especially, but also Black immigrants, Black Americans that are moving out west too. They also face discrimination. In 1849, California has enough people basically overnight, and these people are called 49ers. I forgot to mention that because they came to California mostly in 1849. But it has enough people to apply to be a state. And as they apply to be a state, this is going to reignite this debate over slavery. Should California be free or slave? There were lots of different opinions on this. Some people believe that the whole thing should be free. Some people believe the whole thing should be slave. Some people believe that the Missouri Compromise line should be drawn out west and that it should be split in half or two states entirely. I mean, there were so many different ideas on what should happen with California that it led to its own compromise known as the Compromise of 1850. All right, so the Compromise of 1850 is largely about slavery's expansion out west, specifically in this area right here that was added after the Mexican-American War, right? This was called the Mexican Cession. So four main things happened in the Compromise of 1850. Number one, California is added as a free state. So that's going to please the North. Number two, Washington, D.C., slavery can stay, but slave auctions or the slave trade in the streets has to stop. And that's largely because a lot of people knew that as the country's capital, you're going to have a lot of visitors from foreign countries, and a lot of these other countries have abolished slavery. And if in our country's capital you have these foreign ambassadors looking at slave auctions, it makes America look really bad. But the South is not ready to give up slavery. So the compromise here is that in DC, the country's capital, the slave trade has to stop out in the open, but slavery can be practiced within people's houses or plantations. So that pleases kind of both the North and the South. The South is really pleased by this next one. It's a strengthened Fugitive Slave Act that we'll actually talk about on our last slide in a second. So I'm going to come back to that, but it does please the South. And then lastly, we're going to address this question of, okay, if California is free, cool, but what do we do about this area right here, the Utah and New Mexico territory? What was decided with the Compromise of 1850 is that people who live here will actually just get to vote on if they want slavery or not. Now, the fancy word for this is popular sovereignty. Popular means people, sovereignty means rule or govern. So the people get to govern themselves, and in this case, vote on slavery. Do they want it or do they not want it? So slavery in Utah and New Mexico will be decided by popular sovereignty. The last thing I want to do is just go back and talk real quick about this Fugitive Slave Act a little bit more. Basically, a fugitive is going to be like a criminal who's on the run. And so a fugitive slave would be a runaway slave. And the Fugitive Slave Act is going to make it, it was already illegal to help a runaway slave, but it makes it even worse. It increases the punishment for people who are helping runaway slaves escape the South. Here are some of the things that it did. Basically, if a runaway slave was captured, they would be placed on trial, but they would not be able to testify to their experiences, to share, what life in slavery was like. And they also weren't allowed to have a jury. If you were found to be helping a fugitive slave, like giving them shelter or helping them with food or directions or anything, so like if you're helping on the Underground Railroad and you're caught, then you could pay $1,000 fine or serve 6 months in jail. And then here's one of the worst things about this is it put up rewards for capturing runaway slaves. So there were a lot of people in the North, I don't want to say a lot, but there were people in the North who took advantage of this. And they would go out and they would capture free Black people living in the North and then basically say, oh, it's a runaway slave. And then they would sell those people into slavery. If you've ever seen the movie 12 Years a Slave, it's based on the true story of a man named Solomon Northrop, who was living free, born and free in the northern states, and he was kidnapped and sold into slavery for 12 years. Because he had an education, he knew how to read and write, and so he was able to document and keep a diary of all of his experiences, which he then later published in a book about what it was like to be a slave, and then, in the past few years, it's been made into a movie. So this was something that definitely endangered the lives of free Black people and runaway slaves who were living in the North. Now, the North tried to fight this a little bit. A lot of northern states passed what were called personal liberty laws, which basically made it so that runaway slaves wouldn't be imprisoned and that they would have a trial by jury if they were put on trial. So you see the northern states trying to fight this a little bit because it was creating a really dangerous situation for all Black Americans that were living in the North.